Episode 9, The Great Escapes. Today, the Tower of London. Welcome back to The Line in the Rose, your go-to podcast for English history, full of treachery, triumph, and the occasional execution. I'm your host, Mike, and today we're gonna dive into a thrilling series I put together called the Great Escape series. And these are just daring escapes from not only the Tower of London, but other sticky situations in English history. But today we will be talking about the Tower of London. And just that name alone sends a chill down the spine. This place wasn't just a fortress or a royal residence. It was a prison like no other. If you ended up in the tower, you weren't just in trouble, you were in some serious shit. This was where kings and queens sent their enemies to disappear, where justice was served with an executioner's axe, and where some of history's most famous names spent their final days. I mean, if you just go to that place, if you've ever been there, you know there's a darkness to it. Think about it. Anne Boleyn was locked up just days before Henry VIII decided to send her to the scaffold. Even Elizabeth I spent her early years staring at the walls and wondering if her sister Mary would sign her death warrant. And even think Sir Thomas More, Lady Jane Grey, Guy Fawkes, even Rudolf Hess, Hitler's right-hand man during World War II. That guy, he spent time in the tower. But before we get to the escape itself, let's talk about why John Gerard was in the tower to begin with. He was a Jesuit priest. And I think if you know anything about this era, or any of the Tudor era really, that was a bad thing. England was in a full-blown religious crisis after the Henry VIII broke away from the Catholic Church, as we all know from older episodes. England became officially Protestant. Not everybody agreed, obviously, because of the uprisings and rebellions. Many Englishmen, especially in the north, remained loyal to Rome, and the government saw them as potential traitors. Things only got worse after Pope Pius V excommunicated Elizabeth I in 1570, declaring her a heretic, amongst other things, and calling for her overthrow. In response, England cracked down hard on Catholics. Hard, especially priests. Practicing Catholicism wasn't just frowned upon, it was really considered treason. Catholic priests, particularly Jesuits, like Gerard, were accused of being spies, conspirators, sneaking into England to stir up rebellion, and basically that's how Gerard ended up in the tower. He was caught. He wasn't just a priest, though. He was seen as an enemy of the state, as many of them were back then. But for centuries, the tower was thought to be inescapable. It was built as a fortress with thick stone walls and guarded gates and a deadly moat. Prisoners weren't just locked up, they were watched day and night, confined in cells designed to break the human spirit. The most powerful men and women in history were dragged through Traitors' Gates. And it's a sight, and once you went through that gate often enough, you would never to return back through it. But most prisoners never saw freedom again. But a far few, managed the impossible. A few defied the odds, outwitted their captors, and escaped from the most infamous prison in England. And today, I'm here to talk all about that. One of my favorites, the most daring cinematic escapes in history, 1597, Father John Gerard, a Jesuit priest imprisoned for his faith, pulled off a jaw-dropping prison break right under the noses of Queen Elizabeth's guards. Tortured, shackled, locked away in one of the most secure places in the kingdom. And yet, he got out. he got out. It's crazy. Not only did he escape, but he did it in the dead of night, dangling from a rope stretched over the tower's moat, hands so mangled from the torture that he endured could barely hold on. This is not just a story of an escape. This is really a story of survival, resilience, and of a man who really refused to be broken. He refused to break. To me, that's crazy in itself. And there were a few people throughout history that were able to do that. So let's get into it. Let's check out this priest in peril. Now, John Gerard, like I said before, wasn't just any prisoner. He was a Jesuit priest in Elizabethan England, and now is about as dangerous as being known as a traitor openly walking down the street. Queen Elizabeth's government was obsessed with rooting out Catholic plots and Jesuits. They were at the top of the hit list. So authorities saw them as agents of Rome, a direct threat to Protestant England. And basically, if you were even caught harboring a priest, a Jesuit, anybody against the crown, you could be executed as well. If you were a Jesuit, let's just say the government had some particularly nasty ways of getting information out of you, because that's what they wanted. They wanted to know who else you were with and what else you knew. So, being the timeline here, when Gerard was arrested, it was in 1594. He didn't escape till 1597. But when he was caught, he knew what he was in for the worst. Thrown into the Tower of London, the grim, looming fortress where so many had met their end. But execution wasn't the immediate plan for him, and he knew it. It was torture. The Tower's interrogators had a favorite trick. Manacles, whatever you call them. They'd chain a prisoner's wrists together, and they'd hoist them up and just let them dangle. That was it for hours, for days. The pain was so unbearable. The shoulders would often dislocate, and if that didn't break them, they'd just do it again. I think Gerard was hung by his wrists for actually a few days. Not just once, but repeatedly. His hands would swell from the pain. I can imagine it's not something you'd want to do voluntarily. His entire body would shake from the agony, and yet he never talked. He never gave up names. And that was the most impressive part about it. The Elizabethan government wanted to break him, to force him to betray his fellow Catholics, but Gerard said, I'm not doing this. I'm going to shut up, and that's it. Because Gerard, his body may have been trapped inside the tower, but his mind was already working on an escape plan, and he was already gone. And that was it. So what did he have to do? He endured. He endured the torture. He survived. And while he was suffering, he was planning. And what a brilliant yet simple plan it was. The Great Escape. When did it happen? October 4th, 1597. 3 years. 3 years in the clink. It was a cold October night. The air was damp. The sky was moonless. A perfect cover for what was about to happen. Inside the Tower of London, Father John Gerard and his fellow prisoner, John Arden, make their way to the roof of the Salt Tower. And if anybody's been there and they've been to the Salt Tower, they know how it's really positioned. So below them, the moat, dark, freezing, treacherous. And on the far side, their allies waiting in a small boat. The oars held steadily to avoid making any sound. Everything is in place. If they fall, the noise and the cold, either one would get them. But the method of escape, a rope, like I said before, stretched across the moat. It feels very simple. It's a very simple plan, but a terrifying one. Hand over hand, across the rope, nothing below but cold, black water. And for most men, this would already be impossible, but Gerard has an even bigger problem. His hands are barely functional. After weeks of torture After being suspended for hours and days, his fingers barely work. Gripping the rope is agony. It has to be. It has to be. But at this point, there's no turning back. We've already started this thing. You can't just go back to your cell. So he grabs a hold of grabs a hold, his breath catching as the rope sways beneath his weight. The muscles in his forearms scream in protest. All this dramatic things happening as he hauls himself forward inch by inch. The wind cuts through them. His robe clings to his damp skin, and the moat below gleams like a friggin' abyss. If he slips, it's over. If he makes a noise, like I said before, the guards will hear. The cold, hypothermia might get him. And the tower's gates will slam shut behind him forever, because after something like that, there's no second chance. But somehow, he keeps moving. One hand over the next, then the next. His arms shake, his body's weak, but his mind is locked on that one goal: freedom. Get to that boat. And you got John Arden closing up behind. The minutes stretch on, and they feel like hours. They have to. The silence is suffocating. I'd be breathing heavy. I'd be trying. But, at the end of it, finally, Gerard reaches the other side. His feet hit solid ground. Arden follows seconds later. They're across. The waiting rowers don't waste a second. They grab Gerard and Arden. They pull him into the boat. And with silent efficiency, they row away into the night. Behind them, the Tower of London looms in the background in the darkness, smaller, and disappears. The most infamous prison in England had just been beaten. How do you do that? How? Well, I happen to know the answer if you don't. The bribe and the masterful cover-up. Gerard's escape wasn't just about getting out. It's about making sure no one got caught, helping him. And that started with a well-placed bribe. A little bit of cash, get you places. Even get you out of places. One of the tower guards had been convinced to look the other way. Gerard and his allies had managed to smuggle money into the prison, using the same coded messages and secret delivery systems they used to plan it. They used orange juice, and they write it on a piece of paper, smuggle it out, put it to heat, the message shows up. It's really neat. Try it. Experiment. So, with the right amount of gold, the guard was willing to ignore just enough suspicious activity to give Gerard the chance he needed. But Gerard knew that bribery alone wasn't enough. If the guard was caught, he'd be executed. So why would he even agree to go along with it? So before leaving, Gerard set up a brilliant escape route. A fake one. To throw off the authorities, he left the rope dangling from the tower, making it look like he'd climbed down from inside his cell and slipped out on his own. The idea to make the escape seem so improbable, so impossible, that the tower officials would spend precious time scratching their heads instead of hunting him down. It was brilliant. Everything in this plan was simple, lucky, and brilliant. And then he gave the bribed guard a script. What do you say? This is what you say. Before he left, he told the guard, this is what you gotta do. Wait until morning. Just don't do nothing. Wait until morning. Act shocked. Say you just found out I was missing. That way, no one will blame you. That's simple. This whole thing seems very simple. The brilliance of this move can't be overstated. If the guard sounded panicked or reported the escape too soon, he might have drawn suspicion. But by waiting until morning and acting surprised, he looked like just another guard doing his job. Basically what it was. It worked. It worked perfectly. And when the authorities discovered Gerard was gone, they were baffled. The tower was supposed to be escape-proof, right? A fortress designed to keep traitors in an England enemies locked away forever. And yet, what happens? A tortured, broken priest has outwitted them all. So basically, the guards scramble to figure out how it happened, retracing steps, questioning everyone, checking the walls for weak spots, and by the time they realized they had been played, Gerard was long gone. If that's not entertainment or worthy of a movie, at least a very cool skit, I don't know. It's amazing. John Gerard's escape wasn't just some sort of lucky fluke. It was the most well-planned, brilliantly executed prison breaks in history. It really was. A man who had been tortured to the brink, could barely use his hands, somehow hauled himself across a rope, over a moat, outwitted one of the most feared prisons in history. That is movie level history stuff. And the crazy part, he wasn't the only one. There was multiples. Multiples. So, a part of the series, next up in the Great Escape series, we'll be diving into the story of Roger Mortimer. He was a medieval mastermind who broke out of the tower as well, and didn't just escape, but came back to somehow overthrow a king. And then there's the Jacobite lord who walked out in drag, pulling off a disguise so convincing that he strolled right past his captors. Movie stuff. So that's enough for today. And like as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you're subscribed, talk about it, don't miss the next one. Catch up on old episodes, The Line in the Rose on Spotify. I just want to say, I know I say this all the time, but I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has been turning in, supporting the show. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please, like I said, subscribe, leave a review, leave a comment. It really helps. It helps us. It helps me reach more history lovers like you. You can also, like I said, follow me on Instagram, TikTok as The History Mike, YouTube, Facebook as the Line in the Rose, and obviously on Spotify, Apple Podcasts as well. All that social media stuff, you'll see me behind the scenes content, historical deep dives, discussions, complexity of English history in itself, not just the Tudor stuff. Tudor stuff is great, but other stuff is important too and fun. So, and as always, keep your sword sharp and your history sharper. Until next time, take care.